Hello, marketers. This is the Funnel Lab. Welcome to Funnel Lab Fridays. I'm your co-host, Doug Bell, CMO here at Caliber Mind. Joining me today are Tish Millsap. Tish is the founder of Revenate Marketing, and my frequent guest, my friend, Nick Zangra, VP of Solution to Architecture and RevOps Ninja here at Caliber Mind. Today, Tish, it's Nish. We're going to combine you two. It's Tish and Nick. We're going to talk about the transition from DIY to marketing attribution platforms. Welcome, Nick and Tish. Tish, I'm going to sort of set us up, then I'm going to ask us to tell a little about you and a little bit about your experience, because this is what you do. This is your bailiwick. But if we think about the market here for attribution, about 90% of companies use some type of DIY attribution. That's the self-build, if you will. And we know that some are simple, like some of you on the call right now might remember that day where you created a spreadsheet, downloaded data into that spreadsheet, and then sort of did a pick list determination of what the attribution was. That's a less sophisticated model. The models get all the way up to the point where you're talking about really ingesting first and third party data into, say, a Snowflake database, setting up a scoring model in the background, and having lots and lots of clever searches against that data presented in a BI layer. So that's really what we're talking about today with Tish and Nick, is that sophistication and making that transition over. So Tish, kick us off. This is you, this is your business. Tell us a little bit about you, and then just tell us why you advise people to start with a homemade solution.
Yeah, so for about the past 10 years, a little over 10 years, I've had my own small B2B demand gen consulting firm. It's called Revenate Marketing. It's a made up word. It is a combination of the word revenue and generate. And in my practice, I help marketing and sales leaders create agile, scalable, and measurable revenue engines. One of my biggest passions is working with data, and specifically like creating that connection between what are we doing and how is it generating revenue. So in some sense, all of my engagements are driving towards creating attribution models. Like sometimes I start working with people with lead scoring and things like that, but ultimately I'm really trying to get them to this kind of repeatable, scalable, predictable revenue stream. And a big part of that is having an attribution model. And yeah, lots of times if I'm working with a client and they don't really have anything, we will start with a DIY solution. And I think there's a lot of reasons that a DIY solution is kind of a good place to start. I think the first thing is if you make this big investment in a tool, that can be a blessing and a burden. Sometimes it really drives your organization to like get their act together and do attribution. And sometimes it puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on your organization. So there's this like lurking overview of what you're trying to do. The second reason I like to start with a DIY solution is just to educate the organization and help them understand what attribution models are. I have one client that is created their own attribution model, which was a last touch model. And I started, digging in and talking to them about what they were doing and what kinds of problems that they were having. And I said, well, you have one model and it's telling you the answers in one way and answering a certain set of questions. There is a lot of different kinds of models out there. But having the DIY solution first kind of helped educate their organization about pluses and minuses of different kinds of models. And then the last reason I feel like it's a good idea to start with a DIY solution is just to get your house in order. Lots of people have messy data. They're not implementing campaigns in a standardized way. They're not using UTMs in a standardized way to pull that tracking information in. So really just making sure that you have the basic blocking and tackling in play before you do an investment. There are solutions that are built much more robustly. I kind of question why you would want to get into the business of building attribution software if you actually have another business that you're running. But I know that sometimes, you have the resources to do that. But let's face it, most people don't have 50 data scientists on staff who are constantly thinking about how to build attribution models. So
Right. We were talking about Uber, who
yeah,
who has 50 data scientists, and at one point Nick was like, "Hey, you guys should get CalRemind." They're like, "Dude, you see these 50 people?"
Yeah, one of the first pitches I did as a CalRemind founder was to Uber, and it didn't go as planned. They have a whole team building attribution all day. But I really loved your point, Tish, around, hey, the best practices don't change if it's DIY or you have a vendor. So whatever you need to light that spark to get you to, use campaigns in Salesforce, set up your UTMs, have a naming convention, track budget, all that muscle memory comes into play later when you're ready for prime time with the tool.
Yeah, but something we talked about yesterday is that sometimes buying the tool can be the driving factor. Like sometimes you can't necessarily get your organization to focus on something until there is this driving moment, and buying a tool can be that. You have to really play to what the culture is in your organization and what you need to be successful with attribution. Be thoughtful.
That's a great point. Yeah, prime example. I worked with one company a year or two ago, and they were hesitant to buy attribution because all the duplication in their CRM. They're like, we have account duplicates, we have lead and contact duplicates, we have orphans stuck in our marketing automation that are not syncing over to the CRM. We're just not ready for attribution. So we convinced them to take the plunge, and within 2 weeks, we were able to clean up all the duplicates that have been plaguing them for 2 years.
Wow.
So their whole procrastination, where they're shooting themselves in the foot by putting it off, and they didn't realize that a lot of the tools today, like CalRemind, it's going to come with data integrity tools as well to help you. Because when we started the company, we realized really on that everybody's data sucks, right? I was
just going to say that, like, having data should not be a criteria for whether you get an attribution model or not, because
right. So I think the good vendors out there, they're going to have some type of data integrity, best practices and measures in place to help you maintain that.
Well, Nick, what are you seeing? So we're talking about sort of range of sophistication, and Tish did a great job sort of unpacking why she can advise companies to start with DIY. And it feels like that underlying thread is this combination of data readiness, but also sophistication. And there's a point where those models just can't handle the sophistication. So I think you're is really in many ways the sort of the ninja on the services side, Nick. You see a lot of these companies coming to us with these DIY models. Just how sophisticated are these models that you're seeing?
Yeah, most of them are single touch, either first or last touch. And then you have a handful that are coming over from, I call it the legacy first generation marketing automation vendors. Most of them, like an installed package in Salesforce. Yeah. As you move out to other channels, as your marketing team sophisticates and you onboard more technology, you're spending more budget off of your website, outside of in-person events, on these digital channels. Those CRM-based solutions are not adequate at some point. So I almost lump them in the same category. Either you've DIY'd, you've built a custom object in Salesforce or a spreadsheet that's managing these campaigns. Eventually, you're going to have to think bigger and think of like a big data architecture to support these millions of rows of data streaming in from all these disparate channels. So they're usually single touch, and they're usually highly focused on campaigns in the CRM only, because they just don't see this other whole variety of data that's outside of the CRM.
Okay, so Tish, does this sort of square with your experience? And by the way, can you send us more of these customers, please, with these challenges that Nick talked about?
For sure. But definitely, I think anybody can create a single touch model. And I am a big fan of single touch models. They do answer very specific questions. But I think what happens is that the organization doesn't understand always until they kind of hit that pain point that it's really not giving the complete picture. And so yeah, last touch is telling you what's driving things over the goal line. First touch is telling you something about the source of things, but there's all this stuff happening in between that we're not really understanding the effectiveness of. And that's where having a tool can really allow you to answer a lot more questions in a lot more different ways. I would also agree with Nick is that there's this sort of, you understand one set of data, usually with a homegrown solution. You understand things that are coming into the campaign object in Salesforce, for example. But there's all this other stuff that is happening that you can't really incorporate into your model without a tool. You can, but it starts to get harder and harder to build these more sophisticated models yourself. And there's companies out there like Caliber Mine who are experts in this. So you can really avail yourself of some very sophisticated attribution technology to understand the bigger picture, understand more of what's going on.
The best way to torpedo an attribution product or project is to overstate credit for certain touches. And that's what these single touch models where you tend to end up, because, picture you have an email campaign and that's the campaign that was tracked in that object. And then you close $1 million deal. Are you really saying this one click in this newsletter is worth $1 million?
Yes.
No, there's other touches that are non-campaign touches as well, like sales touches. And
yes,
if you want to build credibility with the CRO, you're going to have to incorporate those into the model as well. And they're not going to be on the campaign object in Salesforce.
Yeah. Yeah, there's ways to get those things into a campaign object. But again, I think then you start over engineering. You're like spending more time building the model than you are interpreting the data from the model. And I also think what happens is that let's say I have a client who built a last touch model and they were just in some senior executive offsite last week. And one of their managing directors was like, that didn't come from a web form. That deal didn't come from a web form. I, interacted with that person a year ago and they came to this roundtable event that I hosted. And that's really the source. Well, they have a last touch attribution model.
That was a year ago. Yes.
So
not the most recent thing they did.
It's not the most recent thing they did. So there's like this epiphany that happens when you have a DIY model that, now we're starting to understand the limitations of what we have. And we maybe need a platform that has more sophisticated models and different kinds of models. So we could have captured that first touch attribution with a first touch attribution model or a multi-touch attribution model. But you start to get, and sometimes the organization starts to get frustrated because they're like, I'm not getting credit for what what I did.
And by the way, Mrs. Via Sales, you also need to make sure that steak dinner has to go into some campaign somewhere, right? You have to have a referral, or else even no matter how good your model is, if you don't have the process and discipline to log these touches, they're going to be blind. The model will not see them.
Yeah.
So I think the final thing we want to mention here, because I want to sort of move over to, hey, guess what? You've made the decision to move on. How do I get ready? Like, what are those steps? Because again, Tish, this is also a big part of what you do, is helping people sort of recognize this moment. We talked about it yesterday as build versus buy, right? At what point do you want to stop trying to be an expert in attribution capabilities on a platform? At what point do you want to trust somebody else to do this for you who does it for a living? So what I want to understand is, what does that journey look like? And then Tish, just give us those heuristics for, you know what, I need to make a change. So tell us how you know you need to make a change when you're advising clients. Then I want to talk about that journey and how to get ready for that transition.
So I think what happens is these kinds of meetings where people start to question what you've done from a DIY perspective. And they're like, why can't the model do this? And why can't the model do that? And then you start, looking at your resources in your organization and how much time and effort that we're spending on building these attribution models. And understanding that we're never going to, like, I tried to build a multi-touch model, like in a Snowflake instance, we were using a different database or whatever. And getting the calculator to do the even spread across all the touch points was a nightmare. And we iterated and iterated and iterated and tried to get it to work. And at the same time, I was telling the client, like, there are a dozen tools out there that will do this for you. And finally, it sort of broke the company. They were like, we can't do this ourselves, but we wasted a lot of time. Sometimes you just have to go through that to understand that, you don't have to build it yourself. You really don't. I think that there are some organizations, like we talked about, if you have 50 data scientists, sure, yeah, go for it. But especially when I come in from the marketing side, a lot of times we are very resource poor when it comes to data scientists. They do not give us the kind of support. They're like, it is sometimes it feels like they don't really care that much about marketing metrics. And then at the end of the day, they want us to prove ROI, but, but, really investing in that seems like it's such a burden. And I think the second part was that, how do you make that transition? Kind of like,
So let's start there. So I feel like, a big theme here is going to be data. Nick, talk to us about the state of data you're typically seeing, even with somebody who's built a fairly sophisticated single touch model. There's still work to be done, and help us understand how somebody could sort of get ready for the transition over to a platform.
Yeah, and one of the key points that Tish was highlighting was the skills gap. I spent the majority of my career before joining Caliber Mind, in marketing operations. And I did not know how to work with Snowflake or SQL or analytics. So if I was trying to build attribution back, Nick, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have built all the plumbing and the ETLs properly and the data normalization processes, et cetera. So that's one thing I'll point out, that there's all these things that now it's like so common sense to me, but if you're a practitioner day-to-day in marketing ops, you're just not thinking about, warehousing best practices and how do you do health alert monitoring and, pipeline uptime and all that. So I'd say as far as getting ready goes, you're going to want to have a point of view on naming convention of your campaign hierarchies, not overdo it, not have multiple levels in your hierarchy, come up with maybe like a strong 2-level structure. You're going to want to have some type of web tracking, both for anonymous and known visitors.
Big one, by the way. Let's pause there. That's a big one. Being able to understand how your first party data is behaving and being able to grow into that is a big piece of it. Keep going, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So having a first party data strategy and a charter from your CEO down. Hey, the first party data becomes the moat and how you win against your competitors in a world where third party data is going away and it's not trusted. So the better people's first data graph is, and that's everything from support tickets to web visits to, G2 crowd reviews coming in to, maybe instead of getting intent data through a vendor like 6sense, maybe you're licensing the intent data directly and now you own it. Now it's in your warehouse. So coming up with a first party data strategy is critical. And then you're going to want to start to have discussions around how are we doing budgeting and managing costs. There's a huge leap to get from a campaign manager to loaded cost of acquisition and with a CFO hat and true ROI, return on marketing spend. So you're going to have some tough conversations around how do we think about budgeting and headcount and tools and channel budgets. I'm guessing that nine times out of 10, the customers that want to make the leap to build, they haven't even thought they want to do ROI, but they're not tracking the I. There's no way they don't have their investments logged anywhere in a methodical way. So there's a few, but there's many more.
And it's just, I would also say those are all sort of the benefits of the transition as well. Like Nick, you sort of described from the basics, like get your sort of taxonomies right when it comes to campaign structure and naming. That's, by the way, really important. The second piece is sort of get your first party data house in order and think about that. And we talked about just the ability to de-anonymize and or ingest other sorts of data, insight data from things like intent data. Those things are super, super important. But also please understand that it is a vendor's job to help you make that transition over. And then finally, the cost piece. Tish, I'm super curious about the cost piece. What are you seeing with clients? Are they maintaining things in separate spreadsheets, or do they even have a bead on what their cost is, say on a campaign or channel level?
It's kind of funny because it's one of the things I go in and do is help them manage their budget. So just back in the day, I worked right out of business school. I worked for $1 billion company, and I headed up global planning and budget management at one point in my time there. And I had 3 people underneath me who all they did was manage IOs and all that sort of stuff and manage the budget. So I feel like I learned so much in that role about how important it is to manage your budget and to be seen as a good steward of the company's money. That will take you so far in the organization. If you can meet with your finance person or your CFO or whatever, and you can come to the table and say, this is what our actuals are, this is what we have planned, this is our forecast, they are more likely to give you more money. So putting that rigor into place and making sure that you are managing your budget effectively and transparently will go a long way towards helping you as an organization. But to your point, it will also help you when it comes to attribution. You will have your ducks in a row. You will know where the spend is, and that will make that ROI calculation so much easier. I did want to say more about the transition piece right there. It's because what I do when I help companies transition to a platform is everybody wants to go to a demo. Like they want to jump in and see a bunch of demos first. But what I try to do is prepare them for those demos and really give them the landscape of like, okay, these are all the different kinds of models that are out there. These are the things to watch for. How do they handle anonymous data? How are they handling moving from one model to the next? How many models do you have available? And also talking about what I call the who, what, and when of any data model. The what is, what data can they ingest? Are they able to look at all these different data sources? Which data sources are they able to pull in? What kinds of, for the when, I always say, what kinds of look back windows are they able to provide? What kind, is a full path model or a, pre-opportunity model? Oh, how do they handle that? And then the who is, are they able to easily move you around from looking all the way out to anonymous visitors, and then all the way down maybe to just contacts attached to the opportunity or the deal? Are they able to give you that flexibility to have those different, views, to cast those wider nets versus those more narrow nets? All of these affect the ability for you to create models that really answer the questions that your business cares about. So I like to prep the team a little bit about, and I also give them a scorecard.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're getting to like a vendor evaluation scorecard.
Yeah.
Which is, former consulting life, I used to do vendor evaluations on marketing automation tools.
Yep.
And I could imagine, and I've seen some today, but what does an attribution scorecard look like? What are your business requirements? How are you going to, before you do all these demos, how do you gauge success and fit?
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of people don't, I'm thinking about attribution all the time. But
Me too.
I'm geeky like that. So, but these people have day jobs, and you're bringing them into a vendor who is going to do a great demo, who I think, to your point, is there to provide that kind of support. But they also need to be evaluating any vendor based on their needs and their requirements.
And I think that, funny the thing is, Tish, you and I first met because you were presenting on how to deploy attribution models for different aspects of your business and or depending on your business. Are you B2B with long extended sales cycles with a really complex multi-channel go-to-market or marketing mix, or you were an organization whose sales cycles are 10 days long, and sort of explaining the different models. And so, Nick, I'd be curious, how does that start showing up? And I think there's this, I imagine in my mind, this glorious moment, like a TikTok video, right? We've seen these videos where the kid hears for the first time or sees for the first, like, and you just, right, you're
Wait,
absorbed.
Doug,
I'm
do you
imagining
have
this.
TikTok? Doug has TikTok.
I have TikTok.
I can't.
And so I'm just imagining this moment. This is such a bad analogy. I'm so sorry, but the moment the client goes, oh, wait, I can see all my data in the same place. I can have chain based. I can have even weighted. I can like I have all these different models at my fingertip. Oh, and I'm actually able to go back to my CFO and go, look at my ROI on this campaign, this channel, this motion, etc. And I'm imagining that moment happens, Nick, when they're like, boom, they see that. Is that the experience, or am I just making it way too melodramatic?
Yeah, it depends on the person. Sometimes there's that, I'll do a demo and they'll be like, this is what I've been waiting for. I've never seen anything like, and wait, I can have AI explain to me a buyer journey. This is like mind blowing, and what's funny, even a year ago, this technology didn't exist. So we're really on the bleeding edge. So there's that, we're first starting to feel that wow factor where the technology is catching up to the business case. And so I think we're seeing more of those epiphanies today than we were even a year ago. But then there's going to be some skeptics, and that's just attribution in general. Many CEOs, they're skeptical of attribution, and I suspect it's because they've survived a poor implementation of the wrong vendor, and so they've been burned.
Yeah,
and they don't trust the model, and so there's sometimes it's an uphill battle. And that's where I think, to your point, Tish, around making the business case, having a really strong vendor evaluation, and looking for probably a tool that you're going to grow with that can maybe do more than attribution. So you're not just buying a micro point tool. I think you want to select a vendor that's part of your larger data strategy. And then there becomes more that, okay, actually we set up by this, but if we buy this solution, maybe it's solving all these other things, and we're able to consolidate these tools, save money, and the business case becomes much stronger once you're able to, fulfill other needs across the organization besides just attribution with the same spend. Then it becomes a home run. So you're trying to tip the scale.
The recommendation engines, the what if analysis, the direction that these tools are going is very exciting, and I agree with you. It really changes the game. You can have a much more complete solution. I would say, Nick, that maybe I've headed off the skepticism before they go into the demo, because I get a lot more of like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? Kinds of reactions when I take
that's why you need a consultant, to take
it helps them understand what they're getting, and they've overcome those concerns. Yeah. And they also realize how much they've been suffering with their DIY solution. Right. Like, oh my God, I was just getting this little tiny thing over here. I had one model and I could have all of this stuff and solve all of these problems and have all this nuance for actually, in some cases, less money, because you were spending all this money on resources to build this DIY solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and I'm sure there's some ROI case you make, like you're gonna save this much time and resources, this much of your marketing spend is going to be optimized. So you're going to get 20 more cents for every dollar you spend in pipeline. So I'm sure it's once you put the numbers in front of a skeptical CEO and they see the data, then they could easily come around. And that we love selling to organizations that are working with a consultant, because it's like paves the road ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So lots of great advice here, folks. I'll just recap for us. First thing is, Tish, typically you're going to recommend that people actually start with an attribution model. In some cases, just about creating the data discipline or a forcing function to think about where they get their cost data from. But that is not the end step. And then when you're getting to the point where you're recommending clients make that transition, you're making that recommendation because something ain't working. In other words, the ability to score or scale, or the ability to really maintain the model and feel like the data is valid, if you will. And so lots of good advice here. Obviously, folks, we are biased towards that platform. If you are one of those folks out there right now working with DIY model, it is not the end of the world. I built 4, but at some point you do need to sort of graduate off to something that's a bit more scalable. So Tish and Nick, thank you for being with us today.
It's been awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
And Nick,
Good to
thanks
be
for
here.
being my McMahon again, my friend. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right, folks, join us next week. We're going to be joined by another amazing consultant who does this for the biz. That's Drew Smith of Attribution. We're going to talk about a little bit of what we talked about today, which is actually which models, attribution models, you should deploy to meet various sales and marketing mix requirements and business goals. It's going to be a cool session. I'm going to geek out a little bit on chain-based and W-shaped models. Tune in to learn more about that. Again, Tish, Nick, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks,
Bye,
Doug.
guys.